While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. You know, we've heard it before. Hacker tactics are not changing, but the hackers are getting a lot smarter in how they deploy their time-tested attacks. Additionally, honing in on the human element of cybersecurity is nothing new. We've spoken with numerous guests about getting buy-in, improving training, and how creating a cyber-receptive culture is key in getting any cybersecurity plan to stick. But Dave Taku, head of product management and user experience at RSA, and our guest for this episode, offers some unique takes on how these two key variables are intersecting to create new challenges in industrial cybersecurity. I think you'll enjoy this conversation that covers everything from managing remote access to evolving hacking strategies like prompt bombing to how AI can help manufacturers prioritize visibility and employee training. So, Dave, thanks so much for joining us here on Security Breach. Really appreciate you taking the time. I hear you've been doing this for a little bit. Your bio says you've got about 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity. So maybe just starting things out, what have been some of the bigger changes or evolutions that you've seen that kind of impact what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And thank you for having me on the program here today. It's really exciting to be here. So I have been in the cybersecurity space for nearly 25 years. At this point in time, spent the majority of that time in identity, also did a little bit in IT networking and telecommunications. And I think the funny thing about it is that, this is an area that is constantly changing, right? It's a cat and mouse game between the good guys and the bad guys. And while there has definitely been an escalation from a technology perspective, the most interesting change is actually the opposite of what you'd think it would be. It's that in a lot of ways, a lot of the attacks that we're seeing nowadays have become less sophisticated and have become more targeting just plain old human nature. And so if you think about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a lot of attacks were against network infrastructure, against vulnerabilities in software and operating systems and firewalls. Now the biggest attacks result from somebody sending a text message or a phone call and tricking a user into providing a password or some other credential. And so in a lot of ways, the human factor is always, the most significant threat in any security program. And today they're just more users, right? It's no longer just your admins or your CEOs that are a target. Everybody within an organization, even all those users you interact with outside of your organization, your partners, your customers, they're all targets, and every single one of them can, be a potential threat to your organization.
Absolutely. Where do you start, Dave? Like you mentioned, there's so many different people that have access to different platforms, and with manufacturers, you've got a lot of remote access just from employees. Then also you have third-party vendors coming into play. Where do you start in terms of trying to manage a lot of these access points?
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think, historically, the focus has typically been on the perimeter. And, some industries like critical infrastructure, like in industrial manufacturing, that may still be the case because a lot of those tend to be locked down. But even in those verticals, like you say, there's so much more of this infrastructure that is being remotely accessed, remotely controlled. Since the COVID pandemic, across verticals, there's more and more commonality of people working from home. And so there's been really a shift over the last, 5 years or so from a focus on guarding the perimeter to really a focus on guarding the individual and really making sure that we understand that the biggest holes into your security are going to be your end users, right? So I mean, it starts with not necessarily a technology approach. I would say it starts with an awareness approach, right? Organizations that are really focusing on things like cybersecurity awareness, and in particular, phishing awareness. When you get those emails for the phishing test from your IT department, like, you don't click on these links. I mean, those are the types of things we need to start with. That good hygiene really beats any technology that we can employ.
It's crazy how it keeps coming back to the simple, basic things, and educating your people. And I ask everybody this question when they come on here now, because we do talk about the human factor so much more, but what have been best practices that you've seen in terms of getting employees to buy into their role in cybersecurity and not just sort of treating this as another piece of white noise that check the box, do the training, whatever I got to do? How well have you seen companies really get folks, fired up to some extent or engaged in this type of education?
Yeah, and I'm going to start to sound like a little bit like a broken record here. It's from technology to people that's really important, and the organizations that get it are the ones that are being successful. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I would have conversations with a CISO or the director of identity or cybersecurity infrastructure, I would often hear, "Well, I don't care about the end user. I'm going to tell them what to do. They're going to do it. They're going to like it, or they don't get access." That paradigm is completely shifted, right? So we now see a lot of customers that we're working with where it's not only the CISO, it's also the chief marketing officer, it's the chief people officer involved in a lot of these decisions, because they want to make sure that the user experience, is going to, provide for, the best possible security possible. So, even my role at RSA, I have been for many years been responsible for the product management organization. I'm now responsible for both product management and user experience because of a recognition of how important that is, right? So, it's funny when you go on Facebook or, your favorite social media site, you often hear about life hacks, the clever things that people do to make their lives easier. And the reality is people do this at work, people do this in their daily life. If people encounter an obstacle and something that they can do every day, they will find creative ways to overcome those obstacles, right? And it used to be the proverbial writing a password down on a sticky note, and now it's much more involved in that. But if we don't make security invisible, and if we don't make this just very, very intuitive for end users, people will find creative ways to make their life easier. And that's never a good thing for security, right? So the flip side of that then is that, organizations who have really embraced, usability and have leaned into it. And so, one of the more common trends we see now is organizations taking a mobile first strategy when it comes to authentication. So it used to be that, for strong authentication, people would receive some sort of a hardware token or a smart card, a physical device that they needed to carry. The problem with that is users don't care about those devices, right? They leave it in a laptop bag, leave it sitting at home on their desk at work, and then those things are easily compromised. Now, if you think about many of us today authenticate using our mobile phone as an authenticator, either through an OTP or a push notification, and you may say, boy, that doesn't sound like it's as secure. From a technology perspective, it may be not as secure as a dedicated hardware device, but think about the change in behavior that creates for end users. End users care about their phones. They don't leave their phones behind. If you leave your phone, you go back and get it. If you can't find your phone, you wipe it, right? So the personal, investment that users make in protecting those devices radically changes the game, right? So anywhere we can really lean in and provide productivity benefits to end users, those are always going to help from a security perspective.
No, it's interesting because we're sort of juxtaposing technology versus culture a little bit here,
Right.
And with cybersecurity, that's the first place we go is technology, sort of not paying enough attention to the fact that it needs to be a cultural dynamic within an organization as well, and putting that focus on cybersecurity and on the individuals who have so much control over it, probably more than they even realize. So it's very interesting.
That's right. Yeah. And it does always start from the top, right? Those good security programs, that good security hygiene, the education, and then empowering and enabling your end users.
You made an interesting comment there too, Dave, about wanting usability, making it easy for everybody to use. And that's one of the things like dual factor authentication causes some roadblocks because people don't like it.
Right.
Are we getting, I guess this is sort of a philosophical question here, but are we getting better at embracing some of these things and knowing that we have to take this extra step, but it's worth it in the long run? Or are we going the other way and just getting even more sort of lethargic about some of these things we got to do?
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this is you see two different things happen, right? So, I mean, I think we're all familiar with the concept of multi-factor authentication, using more than one thing to prove
Yeah.
that you are who you say you are, something you have, something you know, something you are. And I think most people accept that. We do in our daily lives today, whether it's something like a Face ID or an OTP that gets sent to you by your bank via
Yeah.
SMS, right? So those things I think we've become more comfortable with. The two trends that we're seeing. Number one is that multi-factor. It used to be called two-factor, now it's called multi-factor. We better than two. More than two is even better. And a
Yeah.
lot of times we're now introducing invisible factors of authentication, right? So rather than having a user have to do something to perform some interaction, what if we could passively monitor user behavior, look for behavioral anomalies, compare one user's behavior to another, compare their current behavior to previous behavior. This type of behavioral anomaly detection actually provides many, many different factors for us to help increase our confidence in a user identity without ever asking that user to do anything. Now the flip side of that is we have seen situations where, organizations have gone completely to invisible types of authentication and leverage single sign-on where appropriate. And end users in some cases have actually said, boy, this doesn't feel right. Am I being phished? Is something going wrong? Did somebody forget the security? Particularly when you get into things like online banking for high net worth clients, there is a tangibleness associated with even like a hardware authenticator that makes people feel like their money is being protected.
Yeah, it's an interesting, conglomeration of things right now. How it's all kind of coming together there. Talking a little bit more about how the bad guys are getting in with a lot of the more credential harvesting that's going on, things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature, and a lot of that comes from really, evolving social engineering campaigns and how much more complex some of those have gotten. Even
Right.
though the hacker tactics really haven't changed, as you alluded to earlier, they're getting a lot smarter in the way they're getting bits and bits of information. What are you seeing right now when it comes to maybe some of the newer strategies that folks are using when it comes to phishing, credential harvesting, and all that stuff that's allowing them to get into our networks?
Yeah, so it used to be that we'd have these very, very broad, types of attacks, right? Where you'd get the Nigerian prince who's asking for money, right? And that
Yeah.
goes out to a million people, and it doesn't matter if 999,000 of them realize immediately it's not a scam. You just need one to bite on it,
Yeah.
right? But with the internet, with AI, with the ability to really dig up information much more quickly, it's becoming more common to create more targeted spear phishing attacks that go after specific individuals, or to be able to take things like past browser history and things like that to be able to compile a more compelling, seemingly real type of a phishing attack, right? So I think that's one of the bigger trends we've seen. And in some cases, you may get a personalized email from somebody with information about an event that was on your calendar, and it's much harder for you to be able to tell that that is an attack and not in a legitimate, inquiry. So it's always important for people to, just kind of consider if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, right. It's always
Yeah.
worth the additional investigation, rather than assuming things. So follow your gut in that case would be my advice.
Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit too. We're kind of danced around this topic, but a little bit of the shift away from the sort of shame and blame tactic that a lot of companies were using for a while there in terms of you clicked on the link, what were you thinking, that type of thing, and call
Yeah,
them
yeah.
out. Now we're starting to see a shift more towards what can we learn from this employee? We want people to come forward and tell us what they've done. How have you seen that dynamic sort of change within organizations? And hopefully it's made them a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about it that way, but you're absolutely correct, right? And so, in the world of software, particularly organizations that use agile software development techniques, there's something called a post-mortem. We go through, we develop, and then after the fact, we step back and we say, all right, what worked well, what didn't work well, and how do we improve next time around? And you're right, I am seeing that from a security perspective as well, where it's not so much a shame and blame, but it's like, okay, where do we fall down in
Yeah.
our security training? What was it that was unique in this particular attack that tricked this particular individual, which hasn't happened in the past. And I think these things are really, really valuable. One example of this is that there's been many variations now of phishing attacks that have evolved beyond just passwords. Right, we see phishing attacks going after other types of authentication technologies. One in particular that has for many years proven to be very strong is this idea of push notifications sent to a dedicated mobile app, right? And so that was one that everyone saw it as a much stronger alternative to things like SMS based authentication until we started to see these prompt bombing attacks. I think most notably at organizations like Uber, where an organization would contact an individual by SMS, text message typically, and say, hey, we're from your help desk. We're performing a test. I'm about to send you a notification. So you can prove to me who you are. I want you to go ahead and click approve on this notification. Meanwhile, that attacker is, simultaneously logging into the individual's bank or, other resource and then using that push notification to be able to get in, right? So it's called into question, how these types of phishing attacks and social engineering attacks can be used effectively, not only just against passwords, but against other types of multi-factor authentication that we had assumed to be secure.
No, it's interesting. Again, we're trying to, as you mentioned, it's a cat and dog type of chase here, or dog and cat chase here, but it seems like the pace is picked up in terms of we're not as far behind the hackers as we were in the past. Seems like because we are sharing more information, we're getting closer on their heels. We have to talk about AI, of course, because that's every conversation about everything right now. But do you think AI has maybe had the biggest role in helping us stay on top of the hackers and keep pace with them more quickly, or is there some other dynamics that have been in play?
Yeah, so I think that let's get to the AI topic in a second. I think probably the biggest factor, something that you kind of hit on here, right, is just industry cooperation, right? So we've gone from a model 20 years ago where everything was proprietary and secret sauce, right? Even though one of the fundamental principles of security is that security by obscurity is no security at all. And yet, as an industry, we operated that way. So, today we see, organizations like the FIDO Alliance who have really taken on, this problem of phishing attacks and have, worked as a collaboration of, I think now, 60 plus organizations are part of the FIDO board, including RSA, my company, that have worked together to create the standards and to ensure ubiquitous adoption of a phishing resistant authentication to really help put an end to these types of attacks, right? So I think that type of collaboration has really been key. Now, what's interesting about AI, kind of getting back to this topic, RSA does a survey every year, the RSA ID IQ survey, and so this last year, we asked participants, do you believe AI will help, or do you believe it will enable the threat actors? Very, very split, right? So particularly within like the manufacturing and industrial verticals, about 77% of respondents said we believe AI will help, and 23% or a quarter said no, we think it's going to help the adversaries. I think the reality is it's a little bit of a both. We talked about how AI is helping really make if you ever thought knowledge-based authentication was a good idea, put that to bed. The attackers can data mine this type of information and respond to those questions faster than you can come up with new questions. AI is being used by attackers to help defeat things like facial biometrics, voice recognition. It's being used to scam the way through identity verification systems, right? So that's a lot of the ways in which AI is helping the adversaries, as well as being able to craft these more targeted spear phishing types of attacks. The good news is that it's also a tool that the good guys can use as well. And so I mentioned one of these already, a risk-based authentication, or using things like behavioral anomaly detection to be able to provide additional invisible levels of assurance that who you're seeing is a legitimate user and not just an attacker who's stolen a credential, right? So that's one of the ways that we're seeing AI. The other way that I think AI has a promising future is in the area of identity governance. So if you think about, from a zero trust perspective, the idea behind zero trust is that, we want to reduce our overall identity attack surface by not only knowing who users are, but also understanding what they have access to, how they got that access, whether that access is appropriate, and maintaining that access only for as long as that user needs it, right? That's a really, really difficult problem, especially as we start going beyond just our workforce employees and we're talking about our partners, our clients, our customers, the nature of relationships with individuals is becoming a lot more ephemeral. You may bring on a contractor for a couple of weeks. You may have seasonal workers, temporary workers, and it's so difficult to maintain that, reduced identity attack surface. We're seeing AI now really become impactful in an area which we call identity security posture management to help organizations really sort of sift through millions of these entitlements, draw the correlations, and help understand where do I have accounts, which we call orphaned accounts. It's an electronic account, but it doesn't belong to any human individual. Or where do I see a segregation of duties violation? Somebody has the ability to submit an expense and approve that same expense, right? Or where are we seeing a particular user who has entitlements that seem to be far in excess of any of their peers in the same organization? Those types of things are very, very difficult to identify manually, but using AI, it becomes much quicker and more effective to not only identify those things, but prioritize them and bring the most significant threats to the top so that human operators can deal with them before those potential threats become actual exploits.
Yeah. Ton of great points there. I mean, the one thing you just said there, especially for manufacturing, prioritizing them, because we're in a situation where when we talk about ID management, it's not just people and vendors, it's machines as well. I mean, it gets very intense in terms of trying to get everything visible and understood and categorized, but using AI to prioritize in terms of identifying where are the biggest threats and working from there on down, it's a huge benefit and something that could definitely benefit, well, our audience as well as any others. So
yeah, I think absolutely right. And so where authentication and some of the things we talked about here is more unique to human operators. This idea of entitlements applies to human identities, non-human identities, machines, AI bots, et cetera, right? And understanding whether it's a human or not, what they have access to, and closely guarding and controlling that access is a really important part of any security program.
Absolutely. So, Dave, we've talked about a bunch of the scary stuff. Maybe let's talk about some good stuff. Tell us a little bit about RSA security and some of the things that you offer to help manufacturers out there.
Yeah, sure. So, RSA is, a heritage brand in cybersecurity. We've been around for over 40 years. We are really one of the, original, cybersecurity companies. And so, our roots are, began with three MIT professors who invented what is now called the RSA encryption algorithm, and for decades really powered every corner of the internet, right, in terms of keeping that secure. So since that starting point, RSA has really evolved into a number of different cybersecurity areas. But today, our primary focus is on protecting identities, and specifically, we focus on securing the identities of the world's most secure organizations, right? So this is everything from government to critical infrastructure, financial services, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals. Those tend to be the types of industries that we focus in on, wherever those threats are the biggest and those attacks are the strongest. That's where RSA tends to play.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Should I be excited or afraid of AI? The answer is yes, it's both.
Things are going to look so different in the next couple of years. You will not be ready for the disruptions that are going to come. I'm Jeff Nielsen, host of Digital Disruption, the go-to podcast for technology leaders.
Our generation's conflict, I think, is going to be emotional, not economic.
The companies that are going to win are the ones that have a couple of characteristics.
Stay ahead of the curve with Digital Disruption, available now on your favorite podcast platform.
Well, it's interesting, right now, manufacturing, depending on what report you look at, either the number one or two most targeted industry right now by hackers. But in the past, the ones, a lot of those industries you just mentioned, whether it's financial institutions, educational, healthcare, they were at the top of the list.
Right.
From your experience, what can manufacturing learn from some of these other industries? What are some of the things that they might be able to take away, seeing as how they're not so much the new kid on the block, but maybe the most highly targeted one that the bullies are going after on the schoolyard?
Yeah, it's definitely is a problem. I mentioned a little bit earlier the RSA Identity IQ report, right? So we had about 2,100 respondents in this year's report across 60 countries. A large number of those were from the manufacturing vertical, and in this year's report, the majority of manufacturing organizations said that the impact of breaches that they've gone through within the last 3 years or less, that from rated from 1 to 5, that they rated those either a 4 or a 5. And a quarter of the respondents from the manufacturing vertical also reported that the cost of those breaches to their organization was between $1 and $5 million, right? So it is absolutely a significant problem. I think the challenge that you have in these types of industries is that you have a combination of different types of attack vectors, right? In some cases, it may be, organizations, Lapsus was one of the most, high profile these a couple of years ago. We're purely in it for monetary gain, right? So we're going to go lock down some infrastructure, encrypt it, hold back the keys, and hold that data for ransom. Right. In other cases, you may see industrial espionage. You could even see, nation state types of attacks. So, I mean, it is really, a pretty significant attack, potential if you think about it from that perspective. So, what I would say is that, lessons learned from, other industries is, number one is like, you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't do everything at once. I again always tend to focus first and foremost on the users and the humans, right, and make sure that folks you have a good security program that includes education, right, that you are providing strong multi-factor authentication to users, and that you are controlling what users have access to. So if folks who are listening to this, if you're not familiar with things like zero trust, I mean, zero trust is a great framework to start to take a look at. And there's a lot of great resources out there.
It's interesting. You mentioned zero trust a couple of times, and it seems like that can be, I don't want to say polarizing, but people have differing opinions on it.
Yeah.
And for manufacturers, that gets really tricky, because I can appreciate where everybody's coming from with zero trust, but they're like, yeah, but it's going to slow us down. Then we got to figure out how's everybody going to log into a different machine or a different work cell. Could you offer some advice or some thoughts there, Dave, in terms of how to manage a zero trust setup without necessarily reassuring people it's not going to bog them down to the point of being unproductive, I guess?
Yeah, and I think the scary part about it is people, some folks will look at zero trust and they'll look at things like several years back when Google published their Beyond Corp white paper, and they say, oh my God, does this mean that I have to tear down my corporate perimeter? I have to expose everything to the internet. I have to give access for everybody to everything. That is absolutely not the goal of zero trust, and I think Google really sort of over sensationalized what they did, or what they claim to have done in that particular case. Zero trust is not about creating less security, right? It's about creating more. So perimeters don't have to go away. That's not the goal of zero trust. It's just saying that you should not implicitly rely on your perimeter as being the end all be all for protection, right? You have to take that to the user, and you have to take that to the application, right? So knowing who your users are, first step, right? Strong authentication. Beginning to control what those users have access to, the entitlements of the governance piece of that. That's really your second step of the equation. Then being able to take those controls and move them closer to the application of the resource. I'd say that was the third step.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. It's kind of, again, manufacturing, the first thought is getting product out the door. Right. Cybersecurity and a lot of these other initiatives, we kind of round the corners off a little bit. We need to stop doing that, especially if you're looking at something to realize the benefits of a zero trust type of network. So.
Yeah, and I think that's why some of these like data points, like I mentioned, quarter of manufacturing organizations saying breaches have cost them $1 to $5 million the last 3 years. It's important because if you're looking for an ROI analysis, you are now starting to see CFOs and CEOs get much more involved in this conversation, because cybersecurity is no longer viewed as just a cost to the business. It's really a way of ensuring revenue and protecting the future of the company.
Absolutely. And that's something, again, when we talk about culture, we need to get that flowing all through, not just from those champions in the middle, get that into the C-level as well. That's where organizations are successful.
Yeah, and we are seeing that happen. So that's been a positive trend.
Absolutely. Dave, awesome stuff. Really appreciate the insight. Wrapping things up here a little bit. We've talked about AI. We've talked about a lot of different stuff. Are there some bigger trends that you're seeing sort of coming down the road that maybe kind of gotten on your radar a little bit that might be impacting things? in the
Yeah.
near future?
So, I'd say there's three things that we're seeing. And, we had, just a couple of months ago, the RSA conference out in San Francisco, right? And it's amazing to see every year this show get bigger and bigger. Over 50,000 people in attendance this year. And, the number of, vendors continues to grow exponentially there. So, that focus on identity is something that, we're seeing more and more at the show where, 5 years ago or so, you're seeing a lot of focus on things like XDR, EDR, types of technology. But with COVID, with remote work, with these rise in, social engineering and phishing attacks, identity is back front and center. Within that, I think there's probably three trends that we're seeing. Number one is around passwordless, right? And organizations are trying to figure out, how to eliminate passwords as, not only a primary attack vector, but also a huge cost of the business. If you think about things like, the cost for, help desk to reset lost and forgotten passwords, right? I mean, it's a big cost of the business as well. Technologies like, FIDO Passkey from the FIDO Alliance are, I think for the first time on the verge of making this mainstream accessible, right? And so in a lot of consumer websites, things like, PayPal, for example, are beginning to accept passkeys, and we're seeing that technology make its way into the enterprise. So that's number one. Number two, though, is that as organizations roll out passwordless and this phishing resistant technology, as we said, it's a cat and mouse game, right? So now the attackers are saying, okay, well, it's harder for me to steal a credential. So rather than trying to steal a credential, what if I could just bypass the credentialing process altogether? So the biggest, growth in attacks that we're seeing today are attackers going after weak credential enrollment processes, weak credential recovery processes, or going after the help desk and social engineering the help desk and convincing the help desk to reset a credential, right? So, with these types of bypass attacks, attackers are no longer stealing credentials. They're just logging in, right? They're getting those credentials. So it really requires more of a platform approach to make sure that as we look at the identity attack surface, we're not just laser focused on phishing. That's a great place to start. But bypass attacks, brute force attacks, we've seen attacks that involve availability situations where an attacker will go out after a cloud service provider, sever connection from the enterprise to that cloud service provider, and those systems are falling back to password authentication, right? So we need to cover all of those bases. And the third is this area of identity security posture management, the idea that it's not enough to just know who a user is. It's also critical to understand and control what that user has access to and understand whether that access is appropriate, right? To understand the overall posture of the identities in your organization.
No, great stuff, Dave. I mean, in a lot of this, it's not super complicated, but it does take time to do it right. It doesn't always, get the big headlines, or it's not the most sexy stuff to go after, but so critical, so essential, and pays off so much down the line. So appreciate you sharing all that.
Happy to.
For more information on the work Dave and his colleagues are up to, you can check them out at rsa.com. Thanks for the time today, Dave, and thank you for joining us. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Dave Taku, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.